Okay, so we are going to call another powerful man all the way from South Africa. And he's speaking on from policy to impact, advancing environmental, social, and governance, ESG, implementation across Africa's development landscape. And who is this powerful man? The Professor Wellington D. Twala from Walter Sisulu University. Let's give it out for Professor Wellington. Please clap till he gets here. Yes, clap. He came all the way from South Africa. Yes. Thank you, Prof. God bless you.
Program Director, thank you so much. I hope people are not sleeping. So otherwise you have not had lunch, which is, I think is a good thing. So otherwise, once you have got lunch, most people sleep. So I think from my side, I've been asked just to talk on this particular topic. So I'm going to take you through, but in terms of the details, Program Director, how many minutes I have? 12. Okay, thanks so much. So in terms of my outline of my presentation, so I'll start by looking in terms of the introduction and why ESG actually matters, for Africa. Why ESG matters for Africa? So the current ESG landscape in Africa, then we'll move from the issue of policy, look at the issue of policy and implementation, and also look in terms of the gap. Then the other issue will go on to look in terms of the key stakeholders who are driving the ESG. What are the opportunities for ESG harmonization? Then we're going to look in terms of the pathways to action from policy to impact. ESG implementation roadmap overview, and then one thing that we need to talk about as an African continent. Okay, sorry. So it's actually quite interesting. So I change from this side, then I work on the computer. Okay, in terms of my introduction and why the ESG matters for Africa, so as you know, in terms of frameworks, so they're actually gaining traction across Africa. That one is very, 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 very much important. So despite the increase in policy formulation, implementation, actually the gaps still remain. That's the gaps that we need to talk about. So governments, corporations, multilateral institutions, they've shown commitment, yet tangible outcomes, they still lag behind. So what I'm going to explore here is how Africa can translate the ESG policies into inclusive for sustainable development. We need to be able to understand what do we mean by sustainable development. So are we talking about sustainable development in the conventional way, or we're talking about sustainable development in unconventional way? Those people who come from South Africa, the professor is here. There are other people who come from South Africa, they will tell you, as we are looking in terms of clean energy, but thousands and thousands of coal, they are leaving South Africa. So that's the issue there to say, as you think about sustainable development, what are we talking about? Are we looking at a conventional way, or are we looking in the unconventional way? So then why the ESG matters for Africa? So it's a strategic development imperative for Africa. Many African countries, they've got plans which are there. They've got policies. And then the issue that we need to deal with is the bridge between the policy and implementation. So the balance is growth, equity, and sustainability. As we grow the economy, but what we need to do, we need to be able to balance the issue of sustainability, so for future generation. So ESG commitments are increasing across government, so in corporations. So the current ESG landscape in Africa. So there's rapid adoption of ESG framework in key sectors. So which in terms, if you're looking in terms of the alignment of SDG and the AU Agenda 2063, you'll find them there. In terms of many government, in terms of a development plan, what they've put in place, they make sure that those particular ESG, they are also aligned in terms of their government plans. So, but there's also persistent gap between this policy, intent, and the outcome. So that's the main focus that we need to look at. So if you're looking in terms of the policy versus implementation and the gap, so we are looking there. So at the gap that you're looking at is the issue around that regulatory gaps that is there. The policies are there, and then what we want to achieve is the implementation. So, but what stops us from there is actually the gap between the policy and implementation. When you look in terms of fragmentation, one particular issue that you need to look at is the regulations. They are fragmented. So, and one particular thing as you look in terms of the policy and the issue of implementation, that's why I was saying our thinking, we must think unconventionally. Otherwise, if you think conventionally, we're going to think the SDG, which they're going to expire in 2030, they are the Messiah. They are not the Messiah. They are just a framework that we need to work upon. Otherwise, if you take those SDG to say our life is around the SDG is just a guidance to say these are the things as we do our work on a day-to-day basis. So we need to consider SDG. That's why I'm saying, as we talk about the SDG, we must talk about them in an unconventional way. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in a box to say, if you don't achieve the SDG in Africa, we don't have life. So it's like the issue of technology. So look at the issue of cell phones. They've started innovation, they started a long time ago. But as an African continent, what is our contribution? We're talking about the issue of littering. Professor Smallwood will tell you here. Some time ago in South Africa, we've been using plastic bags, but the country was clean. Plastic bags were there, we're using them. But later on, we actually changed. There's littering everywhere. Why? It's not about the issue of policy. It's the implementation of policy. Those people who are implementing policy, they decided to relax. And then as human beings, we started really actually to lead again. So that's why we look at the issue of weak institutions. If you're having weak institutions, you are going to have a problem. And also in terms of limited data. One of the things that we're having, we don't have credible data that will make us to make proper decisions. So misaligned incentives. So when you do the incentives, are we really looking at the proper incentives, or sometimes we're providing incentives which are not actually aligned in terms of what we want to achieve? So if you're looking in terms of the key stakeholders which are driving the ESG, we're looking in terms of government. Government comes to the issue of regulation and offering incentives. The private sector, they come with the issue of innovation and investment. So, but we must all understand that there's supposed to be a working relationship between government and the private sector. So otherwise, if everything we leave to the private sector, we end up having a particular problem. So I think the other colleagues here, researchers who are going to talk about the issue of the transition, so from our energy that we know into the clean energy. But the question, as we look at the transition, the question that we need to ask ourselves, who owns the technology in the transition? So, are we going to afford it in the future? dead packer technology. Otherwise, if you don't ask us those packer questions, we're going to be stuck in the state of underdevelopment, and we're going to become looking in terms of the SDG again. We're going to say the SDG, so we must now really extend the SDG to 2090 because 2030 have failed. So I think it will come to that particular situation where we'll say, let us postpone, So in terms of what I'm talking about, in terms of justice, we're saying, let us just postpone just forward. So if you're looking in terms of so DFI, so we're looking in terms of finance and also in terms of risk mitigation. And civil society, we're looking in terms of advocacy and accountability. So if you're looking in terms of the 4 stakeholders, we require them just to work together. Otherwise, if they don't work together, we cannot be able to achieve those type of goals. So there are different case studies. Colleagues, I'm just highlighting here. I won't go into details, but you must go there and look in terms of some case studies around the renewable energy transition. So if you're looking in terms of generating geothermal expansion in Kenya, so it talks about the issue of you integrate the ESG in the infrastructure. That's one of the case studies that is there. Community benefits and emission reduction. So I think one of the things that why the case study is so much important, which I always, when I address some forum, to say one particular thing that we must look at now, to industrialize. Speakers who came before me, they were talking about industrialization. Can you be able to industrialize through clean energy? Many countries, most countries, unless you can give me one country, they have industrialized through clean energy. Okay? Most countries that have industrialized is coal and nuclear energy. And in terms of the hydro electricity power, they've done that. But in terms of the foundation of industrialization is that one. But the question that we may need to ask ourselves in Africa is, if we're using coal power, how can we ensure that we do research, proper research, so that at the end of the day, we produce clean energy from that, because that one, it becomes the sustainability of industrialization. Believe me, we may have our solar, we must have everything, but those cannot be able to drive the big industry which is going to employ our people. I'm just saying, those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. So then another issue that we need to look at in terms of case study number 2 is the social inclusion. If you look at the AFD, Women and Youth Programs in Agriculture, so they talk about the issue of empowerment through ESG. So they've done good work. So finance linked into social outcomes. You can go and look in terms of those case study. So there's a lot of work that have been done. So around those areas. So innovative ESG models, the ESG link, bonds, green finance. They also talk about the issue of community-driven partnership, cross-sector coalition, so which are quite important. So when you look at the issue of regulatory and institutional barriers, we're looking in terms of fragmented standards, so which in terms of different countries, they've got their own standards, so we don't have standards, so African standard, where you go to one country, so we're able to align everything. Weak enforcement, we need to look in terms of that to say, as we develop our policy, but how do we enforce to ensure that at the end of the day, implementation, it actually happens? I think Africa, we're very, very good in developing policy, but we're bad in terms of implementation. That's what we need to look at. So otherwise, but every government comes after 5 years, they review the policy. When they review the policy, they don't review the implementation. So the only thing, review the policy so that implementation will take place, whereas it's supposed to be vice versa. So inconsistent in terms of ESG taxonomies. So I think I've spoken about that. So then the issue Another issue that you need to look at is actual opportunities. Where there are challenges, where there are problems, there are always opportunities. That's why you see investors coming to Africa, because there are opportunities. If there are no opportunities, opportunities are created by problems. The plastic you see on the road, so those papers you see, those things you see, they create opportunities. But at the end of the day is how to deal with those opportunities. So opportunities for the ESG harmonization, we need to look in terms of leverage AFCFT. So I think in the morning, so you heard in terms of the first hand in terms of presentation to say what are the benefits, what are they trying to do. Those are the things that you need to look at. Develop a Pan-African ESG taxonomy, regional standard setting. So we've got different blocks in Africa. We can start by your SADC, your West African, so East African bloc, all those ones, just to set standard. Then after that, we can set actually in terms of the African standard. So those are the opportunities that actually exist. So in terms of ESG as a catalyst for structural change, we can use the SEG for structural change. So they can drive climate resilience, infrastructure, and inclusion. So I think we can talk a lot about the issue of women, focusing on women, on youth, and also in terms of marginalized groups. So, you know, as researchers, we're always having meetings, but the people we're talking about, they are not here. Always we make decisions on their behalf. So I think one of the things that you need to look at now to say, how do you ensure when you make those decisions for those people who are marginalized? So we also take cognizance that we have got the correct data. So ESG metrics and dashboard. So in terms of data-driven monitoring and accountability, that's the thing we can use. They are for transparency. So those are the issues. As the previous speaker in terms of Professor Edwards, when I was talking about in terms of the use, one thing that you need, I think she emphasized, is a proper usage of it. And we must know the limitation. So, but the future, if you are looking, is in terms of the artificial intelligence, so is the future. But how can you overcome those challenges which come with any innovation? Cell phones, you know, they also brought problems. So how many people are having problems? So there are some, they are given tickets, arrested by police because they are driving. The cell phone is on, they are using the cell phone. There are so many problems that have actually happened, but it came with something that is good. Citizen-driven tracking. So I think those are the issues that you need to look at. Technology and scaling impact. So we can use digital ESG platforms. So right now we're here. Some of the photos that have been taken here, they are just all over the world now. So digitally, we need to be able to use technology in terms of scaling the impact so that many people would have access. If you're looking in terms of farmers, they must have access to information early enough. It's easy for them just to have information now through technology. Looking in terms of agri-tech, fintech, blockchain. So I think in terms of the colleagues who are going to come later on, you're going to talk about those issues of blockchain. So I think you'll learn more about that. The issue of technology as an equalizer. This one, technology can be an equalizer where all of us have got access to technology. So in us, you find in terms of those people who are in urban areas, they've got more access to technology than those people who are in rural areas. So therefore, how would technology be an equalizer where we've got those associations where we're not at the same level? So stakeholder engagement strategies, we need to look at the co-creation with communities. So we mustn't always design everything for communities. We must be able to design with them. So multi-stakeholder forums, so is the involvement. So part of the thing, if you are looking in terms of communities, most of the things that have been functioning, they've been functioning because the people who are there, they've been involved. Incentive alignment, so that one is quite imperative. So pathway to action. So we need to strengthen regulation, investment data systems, foster public-private partnership, embedded, so accountability. So those are the areas that you need just to look at. Although we're saying that different stakeholders who are there, but however, we need to make sure that through the public-private partnership, so we're having the private sector, so in terms of government, which is represented, the community, just to be involved. Otherwise, when you do everything in the three spheres, what you get at the end is the issue of accountability. Otherwise, if there's no accountability, it will be difficult just to implement some of the issues we're talking about. A transformative ESG vision for Africa. Africa is a global leader in sustainable ESG. So we can be able, that should be our aim, to say we want Africa to be a leader in this particular area of sustainable ESG. ESG drive development and prosperity. If you are looking in terms of case studies that have been done and the projects that have been implemented, it has been proven that ESG, they drive development and also in terms of prosperity. So just going forward, ESG implementation roadmap overview. So what can we look at if you look in terms of the future? This roadmap outlines the key stages for effective ESG implementation across Africa. One of the things that you look, just there are actually 7, you move from policy formulation, institutional alignment, inclusive stakeholder engagement, capacity building resources, technology and data integration, look at the issue of monitoring, evaluation, and transparency, the impacting and sustainable growth. So in terms of policy formulation, we need to develop a coherent ESG policies aligned with Africa's sustainable development goals. So as Africa, there are goals as we align in terms of SDG, but each country is having their own goals as a country which are lead to the SDG. We need to be able to align with those ones. Encourage cross-sector collaboration and evidence-based planning. Establish policy incentives for responsible investment and governance. So I think the previous speaker has spoken about the issue of governance issues as one of the issues that are quite important. So the second one is around the institutional alignment, build coordination among ministries, regulators, and local authorities. We need to strengthen the governance framework for ESG enforcement. I think I've spoken about that. Harmonize the ESG standards across national and regional jurisdictions. So the third one is around the issue of inclusive stakeholder engagement. Engage government, private sector leaders, DFI, and civil society. I think one of the things that always in terms of stakeholders, I've never heard, so we talk about the involvement of university student who are at institution of higher learning, because in the future, the one who's gonna be able to run those companies, to run government, but at the end of the day, so we are not part of that. I think that's one issue that we need to look at. So now I think the program directors here, yes, I'm telling you, there are eyes here around me. So promote participatory planning and decision making. So the issue of capacity building and resources, I think you can be able to get the presentation. That issue of technology and data integration. So we need to leverage in terms of digital tools for tracking and data-driven ESG decision making. So monitoring, as we implement, you look at the policy, we also need to look at implementation, and then you must do the monitoring and evaluation so that we can be able to see what you are doing. Are we doing something correct or not? So establish measurable performance indicators and regular ESG audits. So then in terms of the last one, the 7th one is the impact and scaling and sustainable growth. So where we're doing very well, what we need to do, we need to replicate success ESG models across sectors and regions. So once we've done very well, we need to be able to just to replicate those particular areas in other regions. In conclusion and call to action, program directors, I'm finishing. We need to bridge Africa ESG implementation gaps It requires a shared responsibility. We need to move from box checking to transformation. So build partnership, align standard, and scale impact. Together we can create an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future. So what's the takeaway? We need to address implementation gaps, foster collaboration, leverage technology, use ESG for inclusive growth. Otherwise, thank you so much. Chair.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wanted to be cleaner.